COVID building shutdowns have long ended in the last few years. Only a dozen federal buildings are still closed to the public.
But the legacy of those building closures and having employees work from home is having another impact. Wave News troubleshooter Mark Stevens says visitors to the Snyder Courthouse and the Mazzoli Federal Building may notice bottles of water next to the water fountains.
Yeah, it's while we were covering the Brett Hankerson trial that a federal worker brought us a case of bottled water and said, don't drink the building's tap water. It turned out the government agency that owns the buildings has been doing nationwide water quality testing following the COVID shutdowns. What it found here in Louisville could be hazardous to your health.
Throughout Louisville's Romano Mazzoli Federal Building, employees and visitors will notice out-of-order signs and painter's tape on the water fountains, as well as bottled water stacked nearby.
It's a good thing that we're doing this type of testing to see what's going on, especially post-COVID.
That's because the General Services Administration has been testing the water in thousands of federal buildings across the country this year for problems related to the COVID shutdowns. It's looking for unacceptable levels of lead, copper, E. coli, and Legionella, a bacteria that causes a type of pneumonia called Legionnaire's disease. All this testing started because of a 2022 audit that found water safety was compromised at several federal buildings because of a lack of testing and water system maintenance during the shutdowns. George Young helps lead a Louisville lab that's been testing lots of these new government building water samples.
It's still prevalent in our water systems, and unfortunately, one of the other side effects of the pandemic was a lot of low usage buildings. And when your building is not used very often, your water is not flushed regularly, you'll develop biofilms, and in those biofilms, the Legionella will proliferate.
The buildings here house a number of agencies the public may need to visit in person. Social Security and Immigration Courts and the courthouse, offices for the Railroad Retirement Board, the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Mazzoli Building. There's even a daycare there. Test results found 55% of the water fountains in the Mazzoli Building were over the limit for Legionella. The government turned off all the fountains and is providing bottled water for now. Test results in the courthouse found 2 out of 37 fountains above the Legionella limit, but the bacteria was a type that is less likely to cause the disease. No fountains were turned off, but bottled water was also provided. Young says most healthy people exposed to the bacteria will be fine, but cautioned people with health conditions could get sick.
If you're immunocompromised, you're a heavy smoker, you have other susceptibilities like COPD, you could then get into contact with very low levels of it and get a Legionnaire's disease.
He says Legionnaire's disease is difficult to treat because the bacteria is resistant to antibiotics.
So drink from a water fountain that is colonized, and then you can come into contact with it that way. And then at that point you would breathe that in, and if you're susceptible and your lungs are a good environment for that, the Legionella will proliferate and grow in your lungs.
Young explained flushing the water system will help get the bacteria back to safe levels. Replacing fountains or some of their parts also helps. Legionella testing has been part of the Veterans Administration for years. Young says it's good the rest of the government is now getting similar tests done.
You get a lot of leased buildings that maybe haven't had potable water testing, getting this type of testing.
Water testing in both buildings also found 13 samples with higher lead and copper levels than is acceptable. Those fountains are being replaced. A GSA spokesperson told me they're continuing to retest the water to make sure their solutions are working. Mark Stevens, Wave News.
Wow, interesting thing.